Hello, hi. I'm back to talk about episode 2 of season 5 of The Magicians. And as I was watching the episode, which is titled The Wrath of the Time Bees, I was making notes, just so that I can remember what I want to focus on, because if you're on season 5 of The Magicians, you are well aware that the episodes tend to be chock full of information and all of the characters. There's not a lot of times where all of the characters like come together in one scene, in one situation, and are all kind of playing off of each other. They're most often split off in 2s or 1s or sometimes 3s, but they're definitely typically separated, and all of them are often in one episode. Like, we tend to see all of the characters in some capacity. Sometimes it's super quick, other times it's they're all moving around, other times it is just we might focus on maybe 2 or 3 of them at one given time, but the other ones kind of float in and out. And so, as with most episodes, this episode had a lot of different things going on, but the one prevailing theme. So before I wrote grief, which is what I saw as the one prevailing theme, I wrote selfishness as a commonality that I was noticing when I was looking at the episode. And that is just one thing that I appreciate, but kind of annoys me at the same time, which I think is good about the Magicians and the character, is that they are all, first of all, they're young adults. They're all I guess early, maybe mid-20s right by now. They're maybe mid-20s. Some of them might still be early 20s, because essentially, at the beginning of the season, they were all, not all of them. So Quentin and Alice and Julia were all the same age, and Katie were all the same age. They were like freshmen essentially in college. And I think Katie was, I could be wrong about that. Correct me below in the comments if I am making Katie younger, and Penny. So it's possible that Katie and Penny may be like sophomores, and Margot and Elliot definitely gave me like junior. So they definitely were upperclassmen for sure. But they, when you're in college, you start in college. If you go straight from high school to college, you're 18. So those first, early years of college, you're a teenager. Now, in the eyes of the law, you are legally an adult, but mentally and emotionally, you're still very much a teenager. You're still very much connected to childhood and, being a child, living with your parents, however that looks. If you are privileged enough to actually live with your parents. If not, you have some type of guardians, because legally, if you're under the age of 18, you have to have adult guardians. So you have some type of guardian situation, whether it's a good one, whether it's a bad one, whether it's, variances in between. And so they were young, and now we're 5 seasons in. So they are definitely, I would probably say mid-20s then. They're probably mid-20s, whereas some of them might be later 20s, but they're definitely still in their 20s. I don't think anyone has like hit the 30 realm yet. And I say all of that, all of those words, to say that the decisions that they make are very indicative of someone who's in their 20s, who's still figuring life out, who is still, wrestling with what it means to be an adult and how you assert yourself, but there's still very much an emotional immaturity that shows up, I think, in all of them in various different ways. And so strong emotions, strong situations can oftentimes ramp up the not so positive elements of our character. And grief is definitely one of those emotions that can bring out the best in people, but it can also bring out the worst in them, but not necessarily in that they become, actively negative. It's because they're trying to process this very complex situation. And if it's grief, then it involves the loss of something. And as we all know, loss can be devastating. And that is where we are in this episode. everyone is processing their devastation, and they're processing it in all different ways. So we start with Alice. She builds this golem. Like I said in the recap from last week, or from episode 1, anytime there's a golem, it never works out the way that it's supposed to. And sure enough, she creates this golem, but it's a golem of preteen, tween Quentin, and not adult Quentin. And we find out later in the episode it's because of circumstances, which I think is another way of maybe intention, maybe kind of, the metaphysical, where your intentions and your thoughts and your beliefs, they affect what happens in reality. We all know, a lot of people ascribe to that, and they call it different things. Some people call it intention, some people call it affirmation, some people call it speaking positivity, speaking love and light. All of that is about directing your intention, your energy, vibes. All of that refers to essentially the same thing for the most part. And so in this one, intentions in the Magicians is called circumstances. And so we find out that while Alice, while her brain was like, okay, I'm going to create and conjure the adult Quentin because I need him to read this document that he obviously wrote. It's just in another language, but her intentions, her circumstances brought forth, preteen, 12-year-old Quentin, which we find out, which we get confirmation when Julia, discovers him because she stops by Alice's house to get her help on figuring out what's causing the magic surges. So in the middle of all of this grief and sadness that these different characters are contending with, we have a surge of magic, and it's very unstable though. So while magic has flooded back into this reality after Quentin sacrificed his life and himself to stop the librarian from becoming a god, magic returned to the world. So it returned to Fillory, it returned to the America, to this realm, our realm, but it returned as most things that happen in the Magicians when there's spell work. It's never so cut and dry. So oftentimes, and that's one thing I also really enjoy about the Magicians, is that when they do magic, it more often than not does not quite pan out the way they would like. In some instances, it might work well, but oftentimes, you have your singular spell that might work well, but whenever it's a focused amount of magical energy, it always seems to go a little off kilter. So it threw off the time, so that Fillory was, 300 years had passed in Fillory, whereas only maybe a couple of months had passed on Earth. So they had to fix that. Magic flooded Earth and flooded the Earth realm and everywhere else, but then it floods to the point where so many people become imbued with magic. Now Breakbills is overrun by students who need help. There's not enough professors, which is why Penny is basically tricked into becoming a professor. But also now you have these magic surges where in some instances it's just a boost of magic and it really doesn't cause much issue. In other instances, it's almost like an explosion of magic. And now there's a problem because now the non-magical people are starting to notice that there's something happening in the ether, on Earth, in the earthly realm with magic. And so that is definitely something that I appreciate about the Magicians, where it's very rarely so cut and dry, where it's you do a spell and then the spell happens and then you move on. It's there's always something else underneath it. So you have to be thoughtful in what you're doing, and you have to consider the consequences. However, when you're dealing with a group of people who are young, who are in their early 20s, just imagine yourself. If you're in your early 20s now, you may look at this why is she calling me out? It's fine. It's not really about It's not a negative thing. It's really just about, like I said, emotional maturity. When I was in my 20s, I definitely saw myself as someone who was fairly calculating but I was also calculating almost to a fault. So I was very risk averse. So I would like overthink, and then not move forward. But even then, when I did do something and, the results would happen, there were plenty of times where I was surprised at the outcome because I did not expect what happened to happen. And so that is what we see a lot of in these characters on The Magicians, especially the students, especially our core characters, Katie, Elliot, Margot, Josh, Quentin, rest in peace, Penny 1, rest in peace, Penny 2, Katie, all of that. We see in them a lot of, they act. They might have even thought about their action and consider what's going to happen, but they're often surprised at the results. And so it was very, this was definitely a heart-wrenching episode, but in the middle of that, we got some more information and more insight. So while Alice, had to have her journey with Quentin and had to see it through, she didn't think about, okay, I'm about to imbue a golem with Quentin, with Quentin's essence, a small bit of his essence. That might go awry. Like, it might not work out the way that I thought. Another thing that might not work out the way, that we got to see in action was with Margot and Elliot trying to solve the loss of Josh and Finn 300 years prior. And, they kept doing things and then kept realizing, oh no, that didn't work because of this, that didn't work because of that. But whatever they did, the thing, it was always very much like, do it, go, it's gonna work. And it just didn't. And then in the middle of that, they're having their conversations with each other while Margot is obviously disappointed that Elliot is not dealing with being taken over by the god and essentially used to do very terrible, I'm combining terrible and horrible, very terrible or horrible things, in his body, and like not really dealing with that. But then it's like, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with being possessed by an otherworldly being who then basically treats you as something that they use to accomplish things? Like, they're very much disassociated from you. You are just the tool. Like, how do you deal with that? Like, I'm not even sure like what kind of therapy would need to happen in order for you to be able to deal with that experience. And so, but she's definitely disappointed. And I think she's disappointed because he's trying to be so fine, but Quentin's died. They had all these horrible things happen. She's in love. And that's not necessarily something that they do. And I think she's missing her best friend, and she doesn't have her best friend there to kind of talk through what is happening. And they're having their kind of tiff and argument about it. But through the course of this episode and kind of seeing everyone work through their grief, but also doing some things in very selfish ways, the one person or the two people who I don't see behave selfishly, and even though they've had their moments prior, are Katie and Penny. Penny 2. P2 is what I call him. I'll probably change that from video to video because I won't remember what I call him, but Penny 2. Katie is trying to be this leader, but she doesn't really understand what it means to be a leader. She just knows that she should be one, she is one, and people are telling her that that's the way to go. But she's trying to do it. She's trying to essentially white knuckle it because she's still grieving Penny 1. Like, she never really got a chance to grieve him because he died. She was going through the grief process, and then Penny 2 showed up, and then she was happy, but then so she like lost Penny twice. And it's like, how do you deal with that? Who knows? So she's doing the best that she can. She's not doing a great job of it, but she's also elevating her status in the world, the witch world, especially as a hedge witch. And so, they're sending basically assassins after her to kill her and take her out because whatever is happening, they don't want her to do it. And so now we need to find out who they is. And, I think Penny is doing I definitely appreciate his approach to connecting with Katie, and he seems to be sensitive to the fact that he looks just like the person that she's in love with, but is not him because he is in love with Julia. And so I definitely appreciate that dynamic. But in this particular episode, both of them are, behaving the least selfishly, but they're still dealing with grief because even though Penny didn't know Quentin for long, he knew him long enough to miss him. But also his lady, his Julia, he knows how much Quentin means to her. And so he is, he has to experience her grief. And again, Julia and Alice were devastated by the loss of Quentin. And I think so is Elliot. But Elliot has so much to process that it does not surprise me that he does what he does at the end of the episode with the letter that he sends to Quentin. And I'm very interested to see what's going to happen in the next episode once, that process goes through. Now that we've gotten Josh and Finn back from the past, so now Margot has both her guys. She is feeling good. But now we have to contend with Elliot and whatever. And also, I can't help but wonder, they got the God power out of Elliot, but there has to be some remnants left. Because the God was in Elliot for a really long time, the entire season 4, whereas Julia, the God was in her for a hot second. So she makes sense that she would not, have the same lasting effects, but I can't imagine that Elliot doesn't have some type of residual something. And I'm interested to see if we're going to see that in future episodes. But that's my thoughts. That was the big thing, grief and selfishness, that I definitely saw played out in episode 2 of season 5 of The Magician. So what did you think? What are your thoughts? Are you binging it? Have you stumbled across my video? If you have stumbled across my video, welcome. Take some time, poke around my channel. Before you do that though, or while you're poking around, just take a minute and click the subscribe button, because I do this horror themed content in the form of reviews, in the form of recaps like this video. I also have a true horror series where I talk about historical horror from the perspective as it relates to the Black experience, so the historical horror of the Black experience. So stick around, join me. Also, if you're watching The Magicians season 5, comment below. What are your thoughts? What did you think about episode 2 of season 5? Did you get kind of the same things that I'm getting? Did you get something different? Like I said, each episode is chock full of information, so you might have seen something totally different. So let's chat about it in the comments. But again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for checking out my video. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so that you can set your notifications, so that way you can be updated when I put a new video up. But definitely let's talk more in the comments. I look forward to chatting with you. Bye.